Jordan Peele's newest film, Nope, has been out for a little while now, and I saw it a couple weeks ago, and it honestly hasn't left my brain since. I can understand people's criticisms about it being a little bit disjointed, but for me personally, this is probably one of my favourite films that I've seen so far this year. Now, I find Jordan Peele really interesting as a filmmaker because, as most of you know, he came from a background of comedy. Now, whenever most people that transition from comedy into film, whether that be through acting or filmmaking, they usually tend to take on a lot more darker things than you would expect them to tackle, again, because of their comedic history. Take Robin Williams, for example. Absolutely incredible comedian that when he transitioned into film, some of his best on-screen roles ended up being his more serious ones, whether that's his very dark turn in 1 Hour Photo, or something a bit more straight-faced with Good Will Hunting. And as a writer and director, Jordan Peele seems to be translating that similar sort of approach with the films that he makes, because all three of his films do something that you don't really see much nowadays, but I think is really well handled in all three of his films, and that is that he has made 3 horror films with incredibly simple concepts, but there are some heavier, larger themes behind the surface that kind of crack open once the story properly gets underway. Get Out is obviously one of the better examples of this, as it starts off as one thing but gradually starts to transition into something else. And then you have Us, which isn't my favourite film in the world, but again was focusing on a lot of very big, ambitious themes the more you went into the film. However, I do think the execution of those themes was something to be desired, because it started off, again, with a very simple doppelganger home invasion sort of premise, and then when it started to reveal those larger themes, it did it in the form of an exposition dump, which wasn't the cleanest way of doing it. However, with Nope, he thankfully learns from his mistakes and manages to maintain a heavy sense of mystery and intrigue throughout the entire thing, which is something that Us had until like the last act. Nope manages to consistently stick with that mystery and intrigue pretty much throughout the entire runtime, and even by the time you do get some concrete answers, you're still not 100% sure what has quite happened. And I prefer that approach over the approach he did with Us, which is, oh, I don't know what's going on, oh, now I do, and I'm not intrigued anymore. For me, Nope works on many different levels, not just as a horror film, but as a big summer spectacle blockbustery sort of sci-fi film as well. For example, one of my favourite aspects of the film as a whole is that it takes the alien invasion concept that it's going for, but goes for a classic Spielberg mysterious, wondrous approach to it. Because there are multiple times throughout the film where it does start to harken back to films such as Close Encounters of the Third Kind, or The Day the Earth Stood Still, or even M. Night Shyamalan's Signs, and even to an extent Jaws, which might sound weird considering the premise of the film, but if you've seen the film, you'll know what I mean by that comparison. But what makes this film work as well as it does is that it takes that classical sort of Spielberg sci-fi approach, but then injects something slightly new into it. It's stuff that you've seen before, so it kind of prepares you on the type of thing you're going to see, but then when it starts introducing its own take on it, it feels new and fresh. It doesn't feel like it's doing it just for the sake of updating it. It genuinely feels like it is almost kind of passing the torch along to a more updated version of it, rather than just doing it for the sake of doing it. You can tell Peele wants to pay homage to that classical style of filmmaking whilst putting his own spin on it. And when I think about it, his spin on it, I'm surprised it hasn't actually been done before. It might have been done before, but I haven't seen it been done in a film or even a TV show or a book in this way before. On top of all that, you have some fantastic performances, specifically by Daniel Kaluuya and Keke Palmer, who genuinely keep the film engaging whenever it's doing its quieter moments. Stephen Yeun is also very good, and there is a scene involving a flashback with his character that is probably one of the most mentally scarring scenes I've seen in a while, which is one thing I do have to give the film credit for. Even though it isn't necessarily a straight-up horror film, especially when compared to Peele's previous two films, there are a couple of scenes in particular that are like just stuck in my brain and will be there for quite some time, because those scenes were just so visceral and visually striking as a whole. If you have seen the film, the scenes I am particularly referring to are the scene with the monkey, the scene where it's raining outside the house, and then there is also a scene that triggered claustrophobia within me, and I didn't even realise I had claustrophobia. I also think half the reason these scenes and the film as a whole is as visually striking as it is because the whole film is helmed by the fantastic cinematographer Hoyt van Hoytema. I apologise if I've butchered his name, but he is one of the best filmmakers working in the industry today. He did Dunkirk, Interstellar, Let the Right One In. Pretty much every film he touches looks gorgeous, similar to Roger Deakins. And on top of all those aspects, you have a score by Michael Abels. I apologise if I butchered his name as well, but he also provided the score for Get Out and Us. And personally, I think his score for Nope is the best one he's done so far, because again, there are a lot of moments throughout the score that harken back to classic Spielberg sci-fi whimsy sort of filmmaking, but then there are also some moments where the soundtrack kind of does its own thing and takes inspiration from Western films, and it kind of comes out of nowhere, but considering the characters in the film and what they do for a living, I should have really seen it coming from a mile away. But when it was introduced, it is actually a nice touch to the film. But with all that being said, these are just my opinions. I personally loved Nope, but I would love to know what you thought of the film in the comments below if you've seen it. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Bye.